Good morning. We're starting off our Lenten sermon series a week late. So we're going to talk about the rebel Jesus, but I want to ask you a question. It's an interactive question, so I'm looking for a response from some of you today. How do you see Jesus? When you picture Jesus in your mind, what does he look like? Middle Eastern? What's that? A beard? Dark brown hair? Beard, tall, thin? All right. What's that? Cute little baby? There you go. I like the baby Jesus in the manger, that one, yeah. Who else got something? Kind. Good speaker. Long hair. Mentally strong. Serious. All right. All the way in the back, what was that? Soft eyes. Okay, so a lot of times we picture Jesus in a variety of ways, and sometimes I find that we tend to picture Jesus like us. I heard someone say Middle Eastern this morning. Well, actually, last night somebody said they pictured him with blue eyes, and I'm thinking if he's Middle Eastern, so that doesn't necessarily jive, because we often want to see Jesus the way we want to see Jesus, if that makes any sense, the way we like Jesus to be. The part of Jesus that we like and are comfortable with. And so we like that Jesus. In fact, when I grew up in my house, we had a picture of what I call the Galilean Jesus. It was a 1970s picture, flowing hair, looked like one of the Bee Gees, with the beard and everything. And, and so he was singing, staying alive, So, actually, somebody told me that joke on the way out. I can't take credit for it. But I want you to take a look. This is one of the oldest pictures of Jesus that we have in the church, the Big C church, overall church. It's this one. It's from about 500 A.D. It's it's an icon in St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai. Now, when you look at that picture of Jesus, what emotions do come to your mind? What does that look like? What does that Jesus look like to you? What's that? Serious. Seriously dedicated. Sad. Stern. Anybody else got one? Eddie. He can see right through you. Yeah, the piercing of the eyes, or the piercing eyes kind of thing, right? So, how many people have been on Facebook within the past 24 to 48 hours, or gotten a text about a dress? How many people have seen the dress, right? Right? My daughter showed me and my wife were arguing Friday night about the dress. If you haven't seen it, there's this picture of this dress going around, and some people see black and blue, and some people see white and gold. I'm the white and gold person. I see white and gold. They see black and blue, and I'm like, no, it's white and gold. So we have this little argument because of the ways we perceive differently, right? And so that's what's also. I want you to take a look at this picture a little bit differently now. This is also an optical illusion. It's meant to be when it was painted and created. I want you to take your left hand, and I want you to cover up the left side, not your left side, not Jesus' left side. Cover up the left side of Jesus' face so you can only see from the middle, from his nose over, just you see the right side of that picture. You got that covered? What do you see now? What's the expression on Jesus' face? All right, no, the other side, Rod, the other side. You should see a raised eyebrow, kind of a scar or a tear coming down the right side of his cheek. You see his lips turned a little bit up, a little bit like a grin on it. Tell me, what kind of emotions do you see there? Right? Serious, right? Stern. That's the stern stuff. Now take your right hand and cover up that side of his face, the right side, the stern side, and look at just the left half of the face. And see how different it looks? See how you see more of the compassion? And thank you all for volunteering for the mission field, by the way. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, but do you see the difference in the two sides of the face? And so you can look, if you look at the picture as a whole, you might see two different things, but that was intentional because the early church was concerned about preserving who Jesus was, to really give an accurate picture of who Jesus was. And so what they were trying to do was to show not only Jesus' divine side, but also his human side. Not only, he says in the Bible that he came full of grace and truth, and there's a grace side and a truth side to Jesus. There's a compassion side to Jesus, and there's a judgment side to Jesus. And there's a time when he will come back as our judge. So a lot of times I tend to focus on the good side. I cover up the stern side. I want to see the good side of Jesus. I want to see the comforting side of Jesus, the compassionate Jesus. Jesus is a friend. He walks with me. He talks with me. I want to see Jesus that way. Yet there's this whole other side of Jesus that challenges us and challenges people and calls us to live differently. There's another side to Jesus that we don't always see. I want to talk about that. Notice that in the gospel lesson this morning, that at the beginning of the gospel lesson, everybody thought well of Jesus. It says that in the text. Everybody thought he was a great guy halfway through that passage. He comes up, he reads the scroll of Isaiah, he's proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. Everybody in the synagogue's like, hey, good news, that's great. I love this guy. They all spoke well of him, and they're all sitting there going, isn't this Joe? Look at this guy. I mean, he used to be a carpenter's son. Now he's a rabbi. Now he's teaching in our synagogue. Look at how impressed they were impressed with him at this point. But then he goes on and he teaches some things that threaten them to bring them from going to speaking very well of him, liking him, to now being enraged by him. And actually, we didn't read this part this morning, but they actually led him to the brow of a cliff and were getting ready to push him off the cliff and kill him. But he walks right through them and walks away. Boy, I wish I could do that when people got mad at me. Just kind of walk right, So that's what happens. So what happens? What is going on here in the synagogue that turns these people from loving him to enraged with him in a matter of 30 minutes, in the length of a sermon? How do things change? Well, first of all, he's proclaiming the Lord's favor, but I want to suggest to you that Jesus was a rebel. He wasn't being rebellious. We all know what it means to be rebellious, to just go do what we want to do for our own sake, for our own benefit, to kind of rebel against the rules just because we want to. But Jesus is a rebel with a cause, so to speak. He has a cause, he has a purpose, and so he's rebelling against the establishment so that he can lead people in a new direction on a new mission with a new purpose. And he's calling the people in the synagogue to either get on board with that purpose or not, and if they're not going to, so be it. He's going to go on mission anyway. So he is a rebel, but a rebel in the good sense of the word. And so they, first of all, love him, and then they don't like him because of two things. One, he then, you notice when he sits down, when in the synagogue, when a rabbi sat down, he sat down to teach. We stand up and teach in the church, but at those days you would sit down to teach among the people. And so he began to teach, and the first thing he does is he warns them, you guys aren't really going to like what I have to say. He already tells them up front. Did you notice that? I'm not going to really be accepted. You're not really going to accept what I'm going to say, but I'm going to tell you anyway. And then he goes on to point out a time in Israel's history when they were spiritually bankrupt. He's talking about the time of the prophets, when the people had become spiritually bankrupt and God had left them. God had, in a sense, walked away from the nation of Israel because of their spiritual bankruptness. And so the year of the Lord's favor is to, notice he's talking about the poor and the captives and the oppressed. And the times when the nation was spiritually bankrupt were those times when they neglected the poor, the oppressed, the captives for their own benefit or to get better, have a better life. And they forgot about God. And so we think about that, and maybe we can tolerate that message from Jesus a little bit better. It's palatable to us, but as long as we keep it in the first century, right? But is that message still true today? Are we spiritually bankrupt today? Are there poor among us and oppressed among us and captives among us that are being neglected while we get more and more comfortable? Are you aware there's an affordable housing issue in Howard County? I'm not just talking about our cold weather shelter. We're going to have a cold weather think about that. We live in a county that we need to have a cold weather shelter. We have homeless among us, and there are some in our community that would like to bust them out of our county. And so we don't have to deal with them, so we can get more comfortable and live more comfortably, so we don't want to have to look at that or pay attention to that. So there's a part of our county and part of us that wants to get more comfortable at the neglect of somebody else. But it's not just a homeless issue. There's also the working poor, people who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week that are paying 40, 50% in rent to rent an apartment in our county. Think about the impact of a working poor person who has to pay almost half their income just to live in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. It's not just them, though. Our firefighters, our teachers, our police officers cannot afford to live in this county. Right? Because as we who do live in the county grow bigger and we build more bigger homes and we build luxury apartments and we build retirement communities and they become more and more expensive, what we're doing is we're becoming more well off, we're becoming more comfortable, but we're doing it often at the neglect of someone who can't live here. People who serve us. And I think the group that I'm most concerned about is our elderly, our folks that are retired. Because they built this county into what it is today. And they can't afford to live here anymore on their retirements. They can't age in place because of the cost of living. And yet they're the ones that made our great county. And so are we getting better and better and more comfortable at the neglect of someone else? Are we spiritually bankrupt here in Howard County? We're one of the wealthiest counties in the nation. But at what cost? At whose expense? At whose neglect? Does that make you uncomfortable? I hope so. Now you know how it felt to the people in that synagogue. Because he was saying to them, you're neglecting the people among you, and you're spiritually bankrupt. But he went a step further. You know what he said next? He said, God's favor is coming, but not to you. When he mentions Elijah, and he says, God's favor is coming, but notice when God's favor came during the time of Elijah, it didn't go to the nation of Israel, it didn't go to the people in the synagogue, it went to a foreigner, a Gentile, someone that you hated, someone outside the synagogue, someone outside the church. And in the time of Elijah, when the lepers were healed, the leper that was healed was not an Israelite. It was a person of another nation. It was a Gentile. It was someone outside the synagogue. In fact, all the lepers were outside the synagogue. And Jesus is saying, I've come to proclaim Lord's favor, but it's not to you who sit in the synagogue. It's to those outside the synagogue. It's to the Gentiles. It's to those that I am here to reach, and it's not you. Uh-oh. That's why they wanted to kill him. They were great with him as long as he was saying God's favor was for them. But when he starts to change the story and say God's favor is not for you, God's favor is for the people that you won't let in your synagogue. God's favor is the people outside your synagogue. God's favor is for the people that you don't want to have anything to do with, that you don't want to relate to, that you've been neglecting, and I've come for them. God's favor is for them. That's why they wanted to kill him. Again, we're not off the hook in the 21st century. This happens in the church all the time. It's been happening throughout my whole ministry. Every church I've served, everywhere I've gone, I hear the same message from folks. Take care of us, Pastor. Then we'll worry about the people out there. And I wonder why our denomination is in decline, severe decline. I think that's part of the reason. It's a big part of the reason. You know, when I was a church planter many moons ago, I was sent to Urbana to plant a church, and there were 8 other United Methodist churches in that area, all of them in that area, and they sent me to start a new church among 8 other churches, United Methodist churches. How do you think those 8 other churches felt about me? The reason I was sent there was to start this new church because the 8 churches were in decline and were not doing anything to reach the new people that were moving into their neighborhood. In fact, one church in that community built a privacy fence around their property to keep those people out, because they didn't want those people coming to their church. They wanted to just take care of themselves. I preached at that church one day. You want to guess what I preached about? Yeah. No. I'm going to tell you the rest of that story, though. Good question. I'm getting to that point. So I'm still here today. That's the good thing. I was able to walk through it, but then after the sermon, the lay leader took me around the church to give me the tour, and he said, you want to see what we've really been up to, Pastor? I said, sure. So he showed me this project they had been working on all year long. They had spent thousands of dollars on. Not only had they put up a privacy fence around their church, but they had invested all their money into making their cemetery look nicer. Weed whacked, adjusted the headstones, cleaned everything up, to make the cemetery, where nobody is doing anything. And I wonder why the church was dead. They were more concerned with the dead than they were with the living. Jesus said, let the dead bury their own dead. You go proclaim the kingdom of God. I thought about that. Now here's the point where they almost ran me out of town. I went to a local business owner, and we were looking to hold our first worship service. And so I went to the business owner. They had warehouse space. I said, could we hold a worship service in one of your warehouses? This empty warehouse. No, not available. I knew what rejection looked like. So I began to walk out. I said, this isn't going anywhere. But a woman in the office, 3 offices down in that office space, heard this conversation with me, recognized my voice from that sermon, came out of her office, beelined over to me, wagging her finger at me, saying, I know you. I know who you are. And I said to her, you do? I'm like, I don't know who you are, right? And this is what she said, you're here to close our church. And I don't, sometimes God gives you words to say, I don't even know if it's the right thing. But I looked at her and said, ma'am, I'm not here to close your church. I said, there are so many people moving into this neighborhood, all our churches can exist if we'll all try and reach them. She's like, I don't care. And I believe that if there were a cliff nearby, she would have pushed me off of it. That's how mad she was at my presence. She was mad because I was a threat to her church's well-being, the church that she had poured her life into for 30, 40 years. The church that was dying because they're putting a fence up around their church and paying more attention to the dead than the living. They were more focused on taking care of themselves than getting on mission with Jesus, their rebel leader. I often hear this. Every church, I preach this similar message all the time, and I've had this experience. And I always have somebody come back to me, I won't say always, but many times people will come back to me and say, well, Pastor, take care of us first, and then we'll go reach them. Take care of us. And it's kind of like, you remember, when you get on the plane, and they give you're sitting in your seat on the airplane, and they're like, here are the exits. And if we crash land, you're probably not going to survive. But if you do survive, these things are going to come out and you're going to slide down. And then the oxygen masks are going to come down, right? And what do they say about the oxygen mask? Every time you've heard that, it's put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you go put it on others. And that's what I hear sometimes from us in the church. We say, well, Pastor, let's take care of ourselves first. Let's put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, and then we'll go put it on other people. But that assumption is that we don't have it on. And I would say to us in the church that if we've already got the oxygen mask of God's grace on us, and we see other people in our community struggling to get that oxygen mask on, what is our duty? To help them, right? To go help them who are struggling with the oxygen mask of God's grace to get that mask on themselves. But I think what we've done in the church sometimes is we've got the oxygen mask of God's grace on, and we're just going to stay in our seat because it's too scary to get up. We're too afraid. And that's where I would suggest to you that Jesus was not only a rebel, he was a rebel leader. Calling people to have courage to get up out of the synagogue, out of their seats of comfort, and go out into the streets and make a difference. But notice that none of them did that. Notice who were the people that chose to follow Jesus. Were they in the synagogue? No. They were tax collectors. They were fishermen. They were the people outside the synagogue that chose to follow Jesus and become his disciples. Those were the ones that had the courage to follow the mission and this rebel leader. And that's what rebel leaders do. They go and they say, you can follow or not. But I'm going. I'm going to do this. And this is our mission. And he stayed missionally focused. I think about the church, and do you know where the church is growing today in the world? You know where it's growing the most? In other places where people are persecuted for their faith, where it's not comfortable. For the first 300 years, Christianity was outlawed, and it grew, and it thrived. Today, the places where Christianity is thriving are the same places where persecution and where Christianity is outlawed. And where is Christianity in decline? Here in the U.S., in Europe, where it's comfortable to be a Christian, where it's easy to be a Christian, where we get to see only one side of Jesus. But Jesus had this whole other side to him that called us to this great mission, that called us out of our places of comfort, to have courage and to follow this leader. Mike Slaughter, in his book, The Renegade Gospel, asked this question. I think it's a great question. He says, what's it about Christians that's so unappealing? I think we have part of the answer. We have dumbed down what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. We have dumbed down what it means to be a disciple. It's no longer a challenge. It is no longer requires courage. It no longer requires someone to step out of their places of comfort and meet a hurting world. That's the Jesus we're talking about. The Jesus who challenges us, the Jesus who asks us to have the courage to overcome our fear and to make a difference in this world. So my last question is this: is Jesus your friend or your leader? Or both? We like Jesus as our friend, right? And what we do when Jesus is only our friend is we say, Jesus, I'm going to live my life the way I want to live it. I just want you by my side in case anything goes wrong. I just want you to walk with me and help me go through this life that I've ordered, that I've arranged, that I've planned, that I'm in charge of. And I want you just to walk alongside of me, and if I ever get in trouble, just be here for me. And let me talk to you every once in a while when I feel like it. Jesus, be my friend. I think of it like this, and when Jesus is just our friend, it becomes like this, we just try and squeeze Jesus into our life as another friend among many friends, or many activities, or many things. You know, my daughter turned me on to this time-wasting game app on my phone called AA. It's great if you're waiting in a doctor's office or something, you got nothing else to do. It's a time waster. How many people have seen this app, by the way? A few of our young people have seen it, yes. So in this game, it's a very simple game. All that wheel of all those dots just spins one way or the other, and it spins at variable speeds. And then there are dots at the bottom, and the job of the object of the game is to shoot those other dots in between the other dots without hitting them as they spin around, right? It's a timing thing. I thought, this is a great analogy for my life. You know, there are all these things spinning around. You ever feel that way? You know, the wheels spinning, you're trying to, and how can I fit this in? How can I fit this in? How can I fit this in? And we're trying to squeeze all these things into our lives. And Jesus becomes just another thing. When Jesus is our friend, he's just another thing that we try and squeeze into our already busy life that's running at variable speeds and moving. And I'm not very successful at this game, by the way, in life or on the game. But if Jesus is our leader, Jesus isn't just something we try and squeeze into our life. Jesus becomes the hub of the wheel, of which our whole life is ordered around that mission and around his leadership and around his call upon our lives to go and to reach those people outside of ourselves. So is Jesus your friend or your leader or both? I need Jesus to be both. Because as I follow his lead, I need his support as my friend. But his leadership comes first. Amen.